Welcome to our podcast, Raising Big. This podcast is an ongoing conversation between myself and my young adult son. We're ready and willing to talk about all the things families might experience in their lives and relationships, both as parents and young adults, the good, the bad, and sometimes the ugly. In this episode, we're talking about the contrast between and often the struggle with responsibility and authority. Often, growing kids want all of the authority, but none of the responsibility of becoming an adult. Conversely, many parents want their child to have all of the responsibility without any of the authority over their emerging lives. It is a common battle in families as bigs grow up and prepare to leave the nest. Parents want to maintain some control, and kids want to do things their way. Let's dive into this discussion. I'm Marcy, and I'm the mom.
I'm Kate, and I'm her kid. Responsibility is something that many young adults, including myself, say that they want, but oftentimes what we really want is authority over our lives. The difference between the two is that authority is about making all the decisions in your life and controlling what you do, when you do it, how you do it, which sounds like a ton of fun and being able to have that freedom to be able to control your life. However, with responsibility, that is what requires you to pave your way and to go through the outcomes of the authority with the choices that you've made. So that's kind of the difference. The authority is the ability to make those choices, and then responsibility is dealing with those choices. And I think that sometimes as young adults we want that authority to be able to make that choice, but then we maybe want to fall back on our parents to have that responsibility. And I think that sometimes that kind of comes with just being an adult, and you kind of have to break away from expecting your parents to rescue you from your choices, fund your life, help you out when you get into those times of struggle. There's different things that come with that. And you can't have authority without responsibility, and you can't have responsibility without authority. The two kind of go hand in hand. It's a gradual transition from that responsibility going from your parents onto you and having your life in your own control. Mom, you have three kids in their 20s. How hard was it as a parent to navigate this transitional phase, as they kind of grow older? You start to give them more responsibility, start to give them more authority. Was it challenging handing over the reins of authority or responsibility, or how did that look as you raised the three of us bigs?
Yeah, for me, it started when you guys were little, as far as responsibility is concerned. I tried to give you guys responsibility that was age appropriate. I really believe, and I know I say this a lot, I sound like a broken record, but if your kids can, let them. And I think a lot of times in society, moms, dads try to do everything for their child and try to save their kid from pain, save their kid from having too much to do, save their kid from learning how to adult, right? Because those are things that you have to do as an adult. So even when you were young, I would hand off things like, you started at 2 years old sorting your clothes, right? You did your laundry. You're like, okay, grab all your undies, grab all your socks. You didn't know how to fold yet, but you did know how to sort. And then as you were able to do your laundry, you did that. You were a very picky eater as a child. And so at the age of 4, it was like, that's fine. If you don't want what we're having for dinner, you're welcome to make yourself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You ate a
Mhm.
peanut butter and jelly sandwich for pretty much 3 meals a day for 3 or 4 years. But had the permission from the pediatrician that with the other little things you were eating throughout the day, you were good, you were growing, you were
Mhm.
fine. But I gave that responsibility to you. And so you wanted authority over what you were going to be able to eat. But then I also said, okay, but you have to have the responsibility in that situation. So you were
Mhm.
very young when that process started. As you guys got older, the stakes get higher, right? So when your kids are in high school, especially later in high school, and they're making decisions on how to spend their Friday and Saturday night, parents start to worry about, oh, well, if I give my kid the authority, full authority about deciding where they're going and who they're with and all of that, they might make some not so great choices, right? And
Mhm.
kids at that age typically want to be able to just go and run with it and do what they want to do. They want to have fun, they want to experience being young, but their brains aren't fully formed enough to understand the full responsibility of what some of those choices they might be making may end up with, right? And so that is the struggle for parents is in, okay, if you let your kids make all of the decisions at 16, 17, 18, can they accurately predict the outcomes that might happen from
Mhm.
those choices? And then they're underage, right? So responsibility for some of those things still rests with you as the parent legally. as well as for most parents, they feel a moral responsibility to try to protect their child from making mistakes that are going to alter their future choices, right? So like if you have a kiddo who's in their, later teens and they're doing things that will get them arrested or they're posting stuff on social media that may damage their ability to get a job down the road. There are times at which as parents you feel like you still have to step in and be the authority. And so it's not something where I could just hand over the reins to everything to you guys. You know, I think you all made mistakes at different points in your life and made different mistakes, all three of you, but you made them while you were under my roof for the most part, a few little missteps after that, right? But I was then able to kind of guide you through how to accept responsibility for the choice that you had made. Now, that didn't mean that I then pulled back the authority that I had previously given you, right? If you
Hmm.
screwed up, made an error, like you get a chance to redeem yourself. I think a lot of parents tend to just clamp down. If their kid screws up, they'll clamp down and they take all authority away from them. But yet they still expect them to do their chores around the house, to make sure all their homework's done, all these responsibility things, right? Until you do X, Y, Z, A, B, C, H, like on and on and on,
Hmm.
you're not given any authority back. And then they're 18 and they're legally an adult, legally responsible for everything that they do, even if they are living in your home, right? And if you haven't taught them essentially how to fly and how to hold that responsibility, as well as having confidence in their ability to make decisions when they have the authority, they're probably going to flounder. So for me, I was really intentional about trying to give you guys those um, opportunities to make
Hmm.
choices and then to hold the responsibility for the choices that you had made. But boy, is that hard sometimes. Like your instinct as a parent is to protect your baby. That's your
For
instinct,
sure.
even when your baby is bigger than you, right? Your instinct is
Hmm.
still to protect them. But I heard the author Glennon Doyle say at one point in time that as a parent, you shouldn't protect your kids from pain. You need to stand beside them and teach them how to deal with it. And
Hmm.
so when we make mistakes that causes pain and potentially trauma and extra drama and things in our life, but if your child doesn't learn how to deal with that with you, which is where mistakes come, I still at
Hmm.
56 years old make mistakes in making decisions, right? I have full authority over my own life and sometimes I
Hmm.
make mistakes, but then I also have to hold that responsibility
For
for
sure.
that. So that was
And
my experience in navigating that transition and it was different with each of you. You were each ready for different
mhm.
things at different times.
For sure. I just wanted to touch on like something you said about, your natural instinct wanting to be to protect your kid. Obviously as a parent, you don't want to see your kid fail. You don't want to see your
Mhm.
kid, kind of in the instance you talk about, do something that could get them arrested or, post this or whatever. But I think it's important, like you said, to stand beside them through that because everyone's going to make mistakes, and it, to me, from a child perspective, and as someone who has made those mistakes and had a parent who was there beside me, I would rather make those mistakes, when we're talking about the big, life mistakes, I would rather make
Mhm.
those when I'm 14, 16, 18, whatever, and still close to my parents and have you there to support me through it and give me advice and explain, oh, you shouldn't be doing this because XYZ, rather than if you had kind of protected me from making all those mistakes and not given me the authority to do anything. I might not have made those mistakes at 14, 16, 18,
Mhm.
whenever in those teen years. I might have made them when I'm 25 and I'm already out of the house, and now I'm a full adult and I'm responsible for my own actions and I have all this stuff. And it, I think, is easier for the child and a better learning lesson to go through that
Mhm.
as a late teen, early adult, and have that relationship with your parents to be able to cope with that and handle that, rather than making it when they're on their own and it could potentially have bigger effects than it would earlier on in life.
For sure, the stakes just get higher as you get
Hmm.
older and there's more on the table. And you talked about it, being natural for a parent to want to protect their child. I think it's important for young adults to understand that fully. But I think it's also equally important for parents to understand that it is also natural for kids to want to exert their authority and to push their way out of the nest. This is the way things work, right? And
Hmm.
when you have a baby and you start to think about, oh, I want this child to grow up as a contributing member of society. I want this child to be fully who they are. We've talked on other podcasts about unrealistic expectations, but I think just like I want my kids to be a good human is not an unrealistic
Hmm.
expectation for most parents with an infant to hold, but it is a process to get to that point where they can fully human as an adult. So it's
For
important, I
sure.
think, for parents to remember that too, that this is a natural part of the process. It's not that your kid is being a difficult teen. It's not that they're being naughty. It's not that they're, being unreasonable. Are there some kids who push the envelope way too far and you need some intervention or some help, some family therapy, things like that? Absolutely, right? Like there are situations like that where either there's mental health issues going on or there's some trauma or some unaddressed dynamic going on in the family that needs to be addressed. But for the most part, I think in most relationships, it's just an understanding that this is what is supposed to happen.
Hmm.
But I think both sides need to understand and respect that occasion, right? That's what's
For
happening.
sure.
So, Kate, what do you remember about wanting more authority in your life? Like, when did that start for you that you wanted to
For
have
sure.
the ability to make decisions?
I think that that has always been, a part of my life for me personally. Not saying that that's the case for every child, but I've always wanted that authority over my life. It just has changed. It goes from wanting the authority to, oh, I don't want to go to bed at 8 o'clock. I want to go to bed at 9. Or, I don't want to do my homework right now. I want to play video games or whatever it is. So I think that for me, at least, I've always had that desire to have authority. But, obviously, when I'm talking about those younger years, you don't have that sense of responsibility of, oh, if I don't, go to sleep until midnight, then I
Mhm.
have to get up for school at 6 a.m. And then I'm going to be tired. And then, the consequences after that. So I think when I'm talking about those younger childhood years, you obviously don't have that sense of responsibility and the sense of consequences. But I think just for me personally, and I think this might just be a personality thing about me, I've always wanted that
Mhm.
authority. I've always wanted that control over my life. And then, kind of as you get into, your teenage years, you want that authority to be able to go, hang out with your friends and do this, or you want the authority to be able to stay in your room all weekend and, not clean up or, whatever the
Mhm.
situation may be. So I think for me personally, I've always had that desire for authority. But, and I mean, I think you can speak to this as my parent. I think I also have had a sense of, from a younger age, I've always had that sense of responsibility and knowing what comes with that. Me personally, I haven't really had any, big life mistakes. I've made, choices where, okay, looking back at it, I should have done things differently, whatever. But I think I've always had kind of that sense of both authority and responsibility. And okay, knowing if I do this, the consequences are
Mhm.
such and such. So I think I've always had that sense of responsibility. And I think, or a sense of wanted that authority. And I think now that I've gotten older and kind of have completely taken, complete authority over my life, I think kind of you gradually feeding that to me over, my childhood, kind of the things you talked about of, me making my own peanut butter and jelly sandwich for dinner. I think that that taught me from a young age. And I think that that is where I differ, looking at from some of my peers. That's where I differ because I always had that sense of authority and that responsibility of, okay, if I didn't want to eat what I was making, I had to cook my own meal. And I think that that is why now, if I don't want to do something, I'm able to use my resources and find a way around it. Or if I do want to do something, if I want to go on a trip, I'm able to, use my resources and find the responsibility to not, go to Target and blow $200 so I can save that money to buy the flight or, things like that. So I think that that's something that I've noticed, at least with, my peers, is your parenting style of giving us that authority has helped to benefit me
Mhm.
as an adult. So I think I've always wanted, that authority over my life, but I think the way in which you fed it to me and the slow progress I made definitely benefited me.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that brings up a really good point that it is so important to consider the personality and maturity level of your child, right? Like I used to joke that you were, 4 going on 14, 14 going on
Uh-huh.
40, right? Like you just like you said, you have had wanted that authority and you wanted to make your own decisions. And as a parent, I had to get creative finding ways to do that. I took a lot of criticism from some people in my circles that I was making you make your own peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Hmm.
My kids also all pack their own lunches. starting at kindergarten. Like, I set them up for success. Like sometimes we had sandwiches made pre-made in the freezer and they just grabbed a sandwich and grabbed something out of the green bucket and something out of the drawer in the fridge and they were good to go for the day. But I wanted to set them up for success. But certain personalities, right, need more hand holding, more assistance than others.
Mhm.
You mentioned the getting up in the morning, like you you were easier to get up in the morning than your sister. Your sister was not a morning person. As
Uh-huh.
you got older, though, and got into your later teen years and required more sleep, which I think that's another thing, right? People don't understand is that teenagers need a lot of sleep. Teenagers don't
Mhm.
understand that teenagers need a lot of sleep a lot of the time. But like you became very difficult to wake up. At one point, you had like
Mhm.
7 alarms set, and I would come in 3 or 4 times. And some of that was you were learning, right? That when you had the
Mhm.
authority about what time you went to bed, you were going to pay the price. Now you've gotten
Yeah.
over that and you're the one that's out the door at 5:30 in the morning going to the
Uh-huh.
gym, right? So not everything is permanent as you're raising your child. Each child is different, so there might be phases or transitions. Um, you know, I I think remembering that as a parent is really important because if you try to parent all of your children exactly the same way, it's not going to work. What works for
Mhm.
one works for another. You also, like you said, wanted the responsibility, not only the authority.
Mhm.
And I think that's also fairly unusual in kids. And when I hear stories from friends that have the same age as you, right? Kids the same age as you, they're all in very different places on this journey. And some of them have done the gradual peel off and others not so much.
Mhm.
And so then now they're really struggling with this new phase of life that they're in and their child is struggling as well. And so for those parents that we have that are listening of younger children, like this can start at a very young age. That being said, if you have a 16, 17-year-old living in your house, that can start now. If it didn't start
Mhm.
previously, it can start now. But it's the immediate ripping off of the band-aid, right? That makes it harder, I think, on kids and parents. If you wait until senior year, which our last podcast was on senior year, if you wait until that
Mhm.
time to all of a sudden give give your kids the opportunity to spread their wings, they're going to make more mistakes. And
For
so
sure.
ultimately you haven't protected them from that pain. So do you think, Kate, that some of your friends or your siblings struggle differently than you with responsibility and authority in their unique situations? Like maybe did things
Mhm.
feel too heavy for some of them and they didn't want to take that on, or for others they were really struggling with their parents keeping the reins too tight? And what
Mhm.
what did that look like? And you not
For
naming any
sure.
names, obviously, but
Of course. Yeah, for sure. I think that it kind of, just looking at my friends, siblings, people around me, I think that there's kind of people all over the spectrum. There's people that their parents, had the reins tight, and as a kid, they didn't mind that. They were okay with their, parents controlling, what was going on. And whether that be because they were okay with that or that is just what they were used to and they accepted it, that was the case for some people I know. And some people I know, their parents, kind of from a very young age gave them all the responsibility and the authority to make their choices. And whether that went good or bad for them, they were okay with that. And again, that goes back to kind of what I said about, the other side of the spectrum, whether that be because they just accepted it the way it was or, whatever it may be. I think that there is parents and kids kind of all along the spectrum. And I think that that is something that can hinder a lot of, bigs as they grow into their young adult age because those parents who held the reins super tight, I've noticed that either the tendency is for the kids to either move out on their own, go off to college, whatever their case may be, and to either completely just lose control because they've never had to make a decision for themselves, or they are able to kind of pick up on things and say, okay, now that I'm an adult, I know I need to do my laundry, I know I need to make these choices, I know I need to get in bed at a certain time, whatever. And then I think again on the other side of the spectrum, there are kids who once they become an adult and they haven't they've had that responsibility and that authority, by the time they get to adulthood they understand what it is and they've made their mistakes and they've figured it out on their own. But then there's also some people who they get into young adulthood and they still don't have that sense of responsibility and authority and are getting to young adults and still making the same mistakes that they've been making and still maybe not making the best choices. So I think that along the spectrum of everyone, and I think that this isn't just for people in my age group, but I'm sure you know people in your age group when they were young adults. I think everybody struggles with it. Everybody attacks it differently. Everybody grew up differently, and I think kind of backpedaling to in the childhood phase, that's where it's really important to recognize, the type of personality your kid has, and what they specifically need. 'Cause like you said earlier, not every kid is the same. Not, what works for one kid isn't going to work for all, or what, your friend did with their kid or your brother did with their kid or whatever the situation is, isn't the same thing that you necessarily need to do for your kid. So I think that that's important to realize and figure, okay, does my kid need, the reins a little tighter to keep them on track and set them up for the best possible success that they can have, or do I need to give my kid a little bit more wiggle room and let them have a little bit more authority? I think that that's something you just got to gauge
Mhm.
kid to kid.
Yeah, it's a process. And, I think that brings up an interesting point because not only do you need to gauge, from kid to kid, but I think to help young adults maybe understand a little bit what's going on, like your parents the way that they do because of how they were or were not parented.
Hmm.
So sometimes, like, let's say it used to be called strict back in the day. Now it's controlling, right? So when I was growing up, it's like, oh, my parents are really strict. Like, they don't let me do anything. They don't let me make any choices. Now that wording might be controlling. Mom, you're being so controlling. Like, I don't understand why you're doing that. It's just a difference in generational cycles. But I think if you're my age and you grew up with a very strict parent, you will either be equally as strict or you will go the complete opposite direction because you were miserable. You were a child that needed more autonomy and
Hmm.
didn't get it. So then you're going to go the full reverse of being the strict parent and you'll have a free range child on your hands, right? Who just does what they want. That is a whole style of parenting. Free range parenting. And so for some families that works, but I think it is just pretty much a crapshoot about what mix of kid and parent you're going to end up with at any given time and how that parent will handle how they were raised and how they will choose to interpret that and then parent their own kids. So I think it's important to remember that it's not all one sided. Yes, it is the parent's job to raise the child. It is not the child's job to help the parent mature, even though that is really what happens. Like every child that you have as a parent teaches you different things about
Hmm.
yourself and will make you deal with some ish that you maybe haven't dealt with before, right? There's going to be some that push your buttons. There's going to be others that don't push your buttons at all. There's going to be some that you worry that they're not going to succeed. And there's going to be others that you worry they're going to be so successful that they're going to have to learn how to dial it back in order to keep a balance in their life and
Hmm.
not burn themselves out, right? It's all the sides of the spectrum. So I think it's important to remember that and look at each relationship you have with your bigs, no matter what age they are, and decide how you're going to prevent this from becoming a struggle. Because
For
it's
sure.
as a parent, it's not all about you. And I think sometimes that's hard to remember. Well, I am a strict parent. Therefore, I am going to parent all of my three children in a very strict way. Well, you might have one kid that works for, you might have another that totally bucks the system, and you might have a third who you think things are going fine, but they're doing everything behind the scenes, right?
Hmm.
And so I think very important. And if it helps the child to understand how their parent was parented, that's where the conversation comes in. Mom, I don't understand why you are not trusting me with this area of my life or with this. Mom, I'm going to bring you this situation that I'm dealing with right now. I'd like you to hear what I would like to do with it. And then I would
Hmm.
welcome your feedback. And then you've got to do that dance, right? On what the
Yeah.
parent is willing to allow their child to do. So
For sure. So, what do you or why do you think, I guess, that parents struggle, with their big specifically as, either late teens, early 20 somethings, when they're trying to, give them that authority, that responsibility, and kind of helping them understand that balance of authority and
mhm.
responsibility? Because I know some parents struggle with either letting that go or, still trying to weigh in on their opinions. So why do you think parents struggle with that?
I think there's many reasons why they struggle. I think the biggest one is fear. They're afraid of the unknown. They're afraid for their child. They're afraid of what their identity looks like when their child is off having a life of their own. For those who really value society's opinions, they're afraid of what people are going to think about what their child chooses or the path their child takes. That's a concept for a whole nother podcast because we don't have to live that way. But I think a lot of it is definitely fear of the unknown, what that means for their child and what that means for
Mhm.
them, right? As they're doing that dance. I think they fear judgment as well, judgment from society. If they give their kid some rope and their kid makes a mistake, right? They see it as a reflection on them rather than it being a reflection of what their child's choice was. And so
Mhm.
again, tied up right in that judgment, whether that judgment be from their spouse, you told our kid they could do what? Or that you hear from the grandparent, well, when you were young, I never let you, or from your
Mm.
friends, like, might tell you, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry you guys are dealing with that. That's really rough. What can I do to support you? And others will be thinking, oh my gosh, she needs to rein that kid in. Like that kid's a train wreck, right? There's all of that thought
Mhm.
going on. So I think a lot of it is fear, a sense of identity. Who am I going to be when my child does take over full responsibility and authority over their life? So I think those are the main reasons. And some of it is denial, right? Like you're a parent for a long time by the time your kid gets to be a big and your whole sense of self has been wrapped up in getting this kid to where they're going. Yes, you might have had a job. Yes, you might have still had friends. Yes, you might have been pursuing hobbies and passions. But at least in my experience, like that is your biggest responsibility
Mhm.
at the moment, right? And whether you intentionally signed up for that responsibility or you found yourself in that position of having that responsibility, it can be really tough to realize that that season is coming to an end. And I think sometimes
Mhm.
we dwell so much in that season coming to an end that we forget to rejoice in the fact that we're getting to where this is our goal, right? As parents is to raise you and watch you fly. And
Mhm.
that's a very conflicting feeling. Yes, I'm happy for all of you guys that you're off living your own lives. And the farther you get into your lives, the more joyful that is for me. But there is a sad part too about seeing that season of your
Mhm.
life end. Those kids have been in your daily orbit for a long time, and all of a sudden they're not. And
For sure.
that's a big
Mhm.
shock. So I think that's
Uh,
most of the reason that happens.
for sure. Kind of when you're talking about that shock and that struggle, do you have any advice for what parents can do to make it easier on themselves as, they let their kids grow into adults and take on more of that
Mhm,
responsibility and that authority? What have you learned along the way? Do you have any
mhm.
advice, anything like that?
Yeah, this is a really big transition time, and it's a transition that goes on for a long time, right? In
Mhm.
some families, this starts when your kid is 9, right? They start voicing that they want to have, more authority over their own lives. Now,
Mhm.
at 9, there's not a whole lot of responsibility they can take on themselves. But I think, to make it easier on yourself, meet your child where they're at. Have a plan, right? You know your child better than anyone else does, right? Sometimes even better than they know themselves, especially when they're really young. So developing a plan and then being willing to pivot and shift that plan as you need to. Some kids grow up really fast
Mhm.
and they're ready for that way earlier. Some kids, not so much. And it takes them longer, and you almost have to push them out of the nest. So I think having that plan, showing yourself a lot of grace, understanding that, yeah, it's going to hurt. Yeah, it's going to be difficult. So if you try to have realistic expectations of what this long period of time, right, is going to look like, there's going to be times when you and your child are butting heads. There's going to be times when everything seems harmonious, right? Your child's going to go from screaming, I hate you at you because you've just told them they can't go to a party to, this big man child snuggled up next to you on the couch because they just
Mhm.
broke up with their partner. I mean, stuff like that. There's such a dichotomy in this stage of life. And so I think having realistic expectations and meeting each kid where they're at, I think are probably the two biggest things I would say. And then doing your own work. I think,
Mhm.
Therapy is underrated in this country. I wish more people could have it. I also, since I have discovered life coaching, it is great to talk to a coach. If you're having trouble letting go of your kids, and it is about you. If you're truly struggling with that,
Mhm.
that's work you need to do inside of yourself, and you owe it to your kids to do your own work so that you can be the most capable parent, the most well-adjusted parent to your child. So that's the advice
For sure.
that I would give to them. Anything to add for advice for parents, Kate, from a youth perspective?
I kind of agree with pretty much everything you said. And I think, like you said, it's just important to understand kind of the ebbs and flows of, raising that child and how there's going to be moments where things are super good and there's going to be moments where things aren't as good. And there's going to be decisions that they make that, show, okay, they're ready, for some more authority over their life. And there's going to be decisions that show, okay, maybe they're not. So I think just kind of understanding that and preparing yourself for that, kind of like you mentioned, is really just the best way to handle it and to go through that adjustment period along with anything. It's going to change. There's going to be times where it's good, there's going to be times where it's bad. So I think the sooner you accept that, the sooner you realize that, just the easier it will be on yourself.
Kate, how do you think bigs can show their parents that they're ready to take the reins, to maybe ease the struggle a little bit?
For sure. I think, it all kind of depends, what age you're talking at, what decisions you're talking about. But I think, one thing is just to, show them that you're ready. If you are, let's say, working on making a decision of where you want to go to school and your parents, don't think that, you've made the right choice, maybe try to sit down and have a conversation with them and explain to them, this is why I want to go to this school because, XYZ and blah, blah, blah. And that might help change their mind. Or if it is, high school age and you are wanting to, you know, extend your curfew or something like that, have that conversation of, okay, the reason why I want to stay out later is because, me and my friends aren't going to the movie until 9:30, so it's impossible to be home by 10. A movie's not 30 minutes or different things like that. I think having that open conversation with your parents and explaining your thought process in the decisions that you want to make can kind of help ease that struggle and give your parents more reassurance that, okay, they are ready to make these decisions and they've thought out the decisions that they're making. And I think also too, at some point you have to realize that, your parents are just trying to do their job. They're trying to do the best they can. And as much as, that may be frustrating, you don't feel like they're understanding where you're coming from, or you don't feel like they're giving you enough, authority over your life. Kind of just understanding that's kind of the natural flow of a parent child relationship. And eventually that authority will come. Eventually, you'll move out of your parents' house. Your parents will stop, supporting your lifestyle, whatever it may be. So I think that, just kind of accepting the authority that they do give you and, trying to explain to them in what areas you think you could take on some more authority and more responsibility.
And what can you say, Kate, about the approach that they take when coming to that parent? Like, what have you experienced works better? What doesn't work as well? What would you recommend when they're approaching parents asking for more authority in their life?
For sure. Kind of like I said, I think having that more open conversation approach is definitely going to be more beneficial rather than, telling your parents, oh no, like, I'm going to decide when I'm going to, stay out, or coming from a more argumentative perspective
Hmm.
that isn't going to, help your case. Because a lot of times I think parents already have a decision made up in their head. And whether that be, okay, this is the way I was parented, so that's what I'm going to do, or this worked on your older siblings, so that's what I'm going to do. I think I talked about this in an earlier episode. I don't remember which one, but a lot of times parents don't even, have that realization or have, that thought of, oh, maybe they could make this choice for themselves, or maybe they could do XYZ. I think sometimes parents are just so, they have that first initial thought of, no, their curfew needs to be 10 o'clock, or,
Hmm.
oh no, they need to go to a college that is, 2 hours away, or they need to, do whatever they need to do. And they don't have that thought process because they're not living, the life of the
Hmm.
kid. They're not experiencing that day to day life. So I think coming from an open communication perspective and just trying to explain yourself, and again, I think I said this in that previous episode, but knowing that every time you have that conversation, it's not going to result in what you necessarily want. It can at some points in time. Sometimes your parents can hear
Hmm.
you out and say, no, your curfew's still 10 o'clock. Or sometimes there's that middle ground that you guys can meet in. So I think having that open conversation, both of you keeping an open mind, is definitely very crucial to having those conversations.
I think it's important, right, for both sides to know what their preconceived notions are that they're bringing to the table, right? But be open to listening. Because
Mhm.
I think, if as a parent I charge into this conversation with, a preconceived notion of how late you can stay out on a Saturday night when you're, let's say you're 19 and you've come back from your first year of college, right? That summer is hard for a lot of families because these kids come back, they've been adulting for 9 months and they come back and all of a sudden it's like, what do you mean you're telling me what time I have to be home? Like that's a hard one. If the kid comes at them, like you said, from anger or from a fighting stance, right? Or the parent comes at them with, well, this is my house and this is what I say and this is the way it's going to be. That does not lend itself to a spirit of compromise and you are going to have that struggle. But if both people come to the relationship or come to the discussion, come to the table, the kid comes in understanding that, hey, yeah, I have given myself my own curfew for the last 9 months. I was successful at it. Let me talk to my parents coming at it from that respect and try to come to an agreement. Sometimes the parent wants to go to bed. And if they're a parent that can't go to bed until they know their child is home, like maybe there's a agreement that they can come to on how that might work differently.
Mhm.
And so if I as a parent come into it just out of anger, like, oh my gosh, I told this kid they needed to be home by midnight. And last night it was 12:32 when they came in, because you're laying there watching the clock and you don't know where they are. If you come to it like that, it's gonna be a rough summer that first summer. And so really think about the spirit at which you're coming into these conversations. Is your heart in the right place? Are you allowing your child to spread their wings and fly, or are you trying to control what they're doing? And as a child, are you approaching your parent with respect? Are you approaching them with a here's what I want to do and why I want to do it? So I love that you said that, Cade.
Mm.
I think it's important. We need to remember that kids taking authority and responsibility over their lives is definitely the end game. It's what we were all working for all these years. So sometimes kids are more eager to have that authority than their parents are eager to give it up. So the child might be a couple steps ahead of the parent on the ability to give that up. But often also parents wish their bigs would show more responsibility. So then it would seem logical, right, that they're also ready to have authority. So it's a dance, like we talked about. So the way you navigate this transition as a family is going to be unique for each child. Some are very ready at an early age, while others are more hesitant to spread their wings. Both are okay. Neither are wrong, right? Either way, you should honor and celebrate the fact that this is the way the journey of parent and child changes to one of two adults in a relationship with each other as family. Very, very different. You don't want to stunt your child's development by keeping all the authority to yourself. Teach them to make decisions while in the safety of your home where you can help them recover from mistakes, but also give them age appropriate responsibility, the chance to fly on their own and build their confidence. This process doesn't happen overnight and it also doesn't have to be hard. Talk about it, explain the difference between the two, discuss the transition with your big as it's happening in real time. I think parents underestimate sometimes what their child is capable of. I also think kids overestimate their ability to adult before they're truly ready sometimes. So navigating the journey together can build your relationship instead of damaging it. Kate, any parting thoughts about responsibility and authority?
For sure. I just wanted to reiterate that I think that, it's really important to understand that the two go hand in hand. And it just kind of, there's going to, like I said earlier, there's going to be times where it's good, there's going to be times where it's bad. And just understanding that flow and understanding that kids are going to make mistakes and also understanding that sometimes parents are trying to prevent those mistakes, kind of from the parent and the big perspective. So I think that it's really just important to understand that you are both just trying to do what you think is best, and having those open lines of communication can help you both express what you think is best, maybe come to a middle ground, maybe change the other's mind. So I think that it's really just important to have those conversations. Parents, talk with your bigs, bigs, talk with your parents. So that way you guys can better understand where each other is coming from, and that can lead to a better relationship for both of you. But
For
with that being
sure.
said, I think that is a wrap for this episode of Raising Bigs. Thank you all for listening today. We hope you found some takeaways, a fresh perspective, and maybe even an action step or two in this episode. Above it all, we hope it opens an opportunity for conversation between bigs and their parents to discuss responsibility versus authority and how they are able to take that on. We are definitely not experts, but we can authentically share what we're learning in hopes of making the path a little bit easier for those who are listening. You can find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. Please subscribe and share with those in your circle who you think might benefit from hearing it. We release a new episode on all 3 of those platforms every single week.
You can also visit my life coach website at marcyhawkinson.com or email me at lifecoachmarcy@gmail.com. I would love to help you through this transition if you are struggling, or pass our information along or this episode along if you know someone who is struggling. I'm also on Facebook at Life Coach Marcy and Instagram at life_coach_Marcy. Where can our listeners find you, Cade?
My handles across all social media platform is at the Cade Berrigan. That's the same for all of them. The best way to contact us, whether you want to give us feedback, ask questions, or leave any topic ideas, is to DM either one of us on social media, or again, to reach out on the contact me page on my mom's website. Again, that is marcyhawkinson.com. We appreciate any feedback or topic ideas that you may like to share, and we will see you all next time on the next episode of Raising Bigs.